Come on, just a taste? You've let me try a little bit of almost everything else you've brought in. Gerard's voice was wheedling, hoping to cajole and beg the hulking alien sitting at the cramped mission room table into sharing some of the meal it had brought in a heavily shielded and secured container. The alien, a member of a silica-based species called Chungio, shook its ponderous head, pointing to the symbols and alien script depicting some form of warnings along the edge of the sealed box. Not happening, little Gerard. This is intermixed with plutonium and cesium isotopes to help give me energy. If you ate it, you'd irradiate your little fragile body and melt away or something, I think. He sighed, a thunderous whooshing of wind from all three sets of enormous lungs. We've already had this discussion before, and my answer is the same as before. This is not safe for you. Chungio's species had a stomach almost akin to a fission reactor, helping to melt down and separate compounds in rocks and minerals. They lacked any sort of grinding teeth, instead having a sort of baleen once used to strain the rich silt of their native waters. Now, their preferred method of consumption was baking, creating soft cakes and crumbly confections mixed with the powdered nutrients they needed. Several of these were palatable to humans, and helped create something that was akin to a sugar cookie, if with a bit of an acidic metallic tang and some stubborn grittiness, and Chungio had given Gerard the occasional one of these treats, much to the human's delight. Gerard had tried to offer him some tastes of his fried meat skewers or boiled grain seeds in return, but they were distinctly bland and slimy to Chungio's tastes, and so he often accepted them only to dispose of them discreetly without tasting the human foodstuff. The small biped's enthusiasm was infectious, though, and Chungio knew he had probably started bringing more human-safe meals along to work than he would have otherwise, if only to see the man's enthusiasm and gusto as he chowed down on the latest baked treat. He'd even begun mixing in some human nutritional powder called flour, something he couldn't taste but provided a helpful degree of glutinous cohesion to some of his more crumbly recipes. Chungio had always fancied himself a baker despite the strands of life leading him down a path of working at a mere hydrogen refinery, and while his family were all light years distant and seen only around his yearly leave period, Gerard presented a unique opportunity to test out new recipes and ideas when the ingredients permitted. There were a handful of other humans aboard, but most had only a passing interest in trying alien delicacies, while Gerard had what the humans called a bottomless pit for a digestive tract. The gravitational readings he had then surreptitiously taken of the human did not indicate any sort of localized singularities in his area, so the alien had taken it as simply an odd human turn of phrase instead. Months passed, each week marked by a new creation, feedback from the voracious human when possible, and refinement of his recipe before storing it in his personal baking logbook. Chungio had plans to one day publish a collection of those recipes, something Gerard said humans called a cookbook, but he wanted to ensure a sizable and respectable roster of culinary options before it was to be seen by anyone else. Then Gerard had disrupted his mental visions of accolades and invitations to baking competitions with a wood pulp box he presented to the large alien. It was wrapped in a thin shell of iridescent foiled pressed and dried wood pulp, and topped with what looked like a flower or plant made of a thin strip of green textile looped back and fastened in upon itself dozens of times over. "What's this?" he had asked, and the human had beamed. "Well, today is your your emergence day, so I wanted to get you something to celebrate. It's a gift." Chungio's pairs of eyes widened in surprise. The human had asked him about his emergence day weeks and weeks ago, with what he had at the time taken to be only passing mild curiosity as the alien spoke of the first time. He stepped forth from the birth pool he and his clutch were laid in, nearly 200 years earlier. He barely remembered the date himself, his species only marking it to use for intergalactic census questions for individuals' ages, but the human had remembered, and then following human customs had given him a gift as well. After a moment of hesitation, Chungio ripped open the container, massive and blocky fingers partially crushing the wood pulp box despite his best efforts, until he held a white cylindrical piece of textile, with a pleated pattern along the long circular perimeter. "It's a very nice whatever it is, I suppose," he said, feeling awkward and slightly guilty. He didn't know more about human culture to be able to recognize the object. "It's a hat, to go on your head," said Gerard proudly. "Specifically, it's a chef's hat." It's worn by humans whose professions are in baking, cooking, and similar food artistry. Turning it over in his hands, Chunjio could see that the hat was also scaled to hit his enormous head, as it would be large enough to completely engulf Gerard if he tried to don it. Go on, try it on. I hope I got the estimates of the size measurements right, said the human. The alien was unsure of what emotions were slowly but surely chugging through his veins as he gingerly placed the hat upon his head. His species wore almost no clothing like those of other races, typically restricting themselves to functional items like tool belts and protective vests, and only the occasional brightly colored wristbands or sashes to accentuate their appearance. Still, the surge of feelings through his mind finally coalesced into pride and appreciation as he caught sight of himself on a reflective metal panel nearby, and Gerard nodded approvingly. You always were a great chef, but now you look the part as well. Chunjio was speechless for a long time, but the next day showed his appreciation with a large batch of human-safe confections made entirely from a recipe Gerard had given him from his own mother's mother, something he said was called Nana's scones. Nearly half a century later, the day Chunjio had been dreading was rapidly approaching. Gerard's vision had been failing despite laser and medicinal intervention, and the week prior it had resulted in him accidentally activating a release valve too early in the refinement process. A wash of aerosolized chemicals had washed over the unfortunate and unshielded human, and while he had recovered moderately well from the initial effects, it had irreversibly damaged his fragile and singular set of lungs. Still bedridden, he had nevertheless greeted Chunjio's daily visits with enthusiasm, even as the alien could see less and less energy and alertness from the human with each passing day. His joking and feedback on the new recipes were sharp as ever, though, and again he told the alien he should stop stalling and publish his cookbook. I'm not sure that it's ready yet, Chunjio had protested. What if it's been too long since I tried a recipe, and the ingredients are unobtainable now? Or perhaps my palate has matured, and the old recipe was worse. Or better. Gerard had coughed and chuckled at the alien's hemming and hawing. The best time to have done a task is yesterday, but the second best time is today. Just make the leap, old friend, or else you'll go to your grave full of regret. He coughed, and his eyes slid away as Chunjio looked on. And what of you, little Gerard? Do you have any regrets? The words before you pass on were left unspoken, but hung heavily between them. The onboard multi-species doctor had informed Chunjio that any further care was palliative, and Gerard's prognosis outside of the next week was nil. Well, there is one of your recipes I had always wanted to try, he said at length. Chunjio hung on his every word, and as the human described it, he smiled, baleen showing like dark teeth as he emulated the human expression. I think I have the ingredients for one last batch of that, although I'll need to dust off the canister seals. I haven't made it in some time, almost as long as I've known you, so I hope the recipe is still good. Gerard smiled back, laughing bright and clearly for the first time in days, as he said, I'm sure it is, old friend. Your treats never disappoint. Hours later, Chunjio had snuck back into the medical ward, avoiding the scrutiny of doctors and nurses as he carried the sealed crate. Dust-streaked alien radiation warnings still stuck to the outside. Once in the human's room, he unsealed the crate, passing one of the gently glowing cookies over to the ailing human. Gerard eyed it admiringly, giving a low whistle that Chunjio had learned was a sign of appreciation, before biting into it with gusto. Then the human's eyes lit up with surprise. Wow, that tastes just like peppermint. In a human graveyard, on one of the moons of Jupiter that Gerard had once said he'd have liked to visit, is a humble tombstone. On it lies a book, sun-bleached but otherwise preserved in the dry near vacuum of what passed for the moon's atmosphere. It's a copy of Baking for Humans, marked with a galactic bestseller sticker. Inside the cover is a handwritten dedication. To Gerard, my best customer and friend, you are Miss C.